Welcome, everybody. I'll give everyone just a minute to join us. Thanks for being here. Welcome, everybody. I'll just give us another few seconds for people to join us, and then we're going to get started. Thanks for being here. All right, I think we will go ahead and get started. I'm Jennifer Mnookin, for those who don't know me, and I'm Dean now here at UCLA Law School. Welcome to Reunion 2020 and this very special conversation. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that UCLA sits on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tonka peoples. As a land-grant institution, we pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives, past, present, and emerging. Obviously, this is an unusual reunion and an unusual time. I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for logging into this virtual event. The limits of physical distancing have caused us to pivot in all kinds of ways for all of us, for everybody on this call. But I think we've also seen a lot about flexibility, resilience, and creativity. I know that's certainly true here at UCLA Law School. I want to very much thank the people who've made possible this evening's reunion celebration, as well as the past several days of events. This includes our terrific reunion committees for helping us bring tonight to life, our events team and our external affairs team, and so many others in the UCLA community. Thank you all very, very much. I also want to thank my fellow UCLA Law Deans who have joined me this evening for this conversation. I'm really grateful that they've been willing to in most cases, to come back to UCLA to participate in this way. And so thank you very much to each of them. Now, this reunion also arrives during what is just simply an immensely challenging time in so many ways, with obviously COVID-19, as well as widespread protests over systemic racism following the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many others, with fires raging all across our state and the West, and then, of course, the extraordinary events of the last couple of days. People keep saying this is a time like no other, and then it gets even more complex and challenging. And so against this backdrop, I'm glad we have this opportunity to come together for a conversation like this and a celebration like Reunion, and a chance to remember what's valuable about your UCLA Law School experiences and to reconnect with some of your classmates and friends. I'm truly sorry that one of the many things we can't do right now is gather in person. We can't be in the courtyard that I've chosen as my virtual background here. We can't be nearby for a dinner under the stars. But of course, we can't do that. And so tonight, before you break out into sessions for your individual class years, we're beginning with this special conversation, a chance to talk with several former UCLA Law School deans on the past, present, and future of UCLA Law School and higher education. I want us to be able to get right to it. I think it's fair to say that none of my colleagues needs any introduction, I think, to those of us in the UCLA law community. And the very quick introductions I'm about to do not do them justice at all. Nevertheless, I will quickly identify them, at least to make it clear whose face is in which box, but I think you would actually know that from their names and without my doing that. Nonetheless, Susan Westerberg Prager was dean from 1982 to 1998. A really sensational run. And after that went on to be provost at Dartmouth, president at Occidental, and executive director of the Association of American Law Schools. She's been the dean at Southwestern Law School since 2013. John Varat was dean from 1998 to 2003. He's a distinguished constitutional law scholar and an emeritus professor here at UCLA Law School, and continues to be a trusted advisor for me and so many at the law school in a great many ways. Mike Schill was dean from 2004 to 2009, and then went on to serve as the dean of the University of Chicago Law School. And he's been president of the University of Oregon since 2015. And Rachel Moran was dean from 2010 to 2015. She's now a distinguished professor of law and leading scholar focused on race in the law, education in the law, and other subjects at UC Irvine School of Law, where she also served as a founding faculty member, as well as having spent many years of her career at Berkeley Law School. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Deans Prager, Varat, Dean/President Schill, and Moran. I think if you'd like, we're going to start. I'm going to ask them some questions, but there is a Q&A function. And if you'd like to insert a question into the Q&A, I will certainly try to get to a few audience questions as well. So please feel free to do that. I'd like to begin by asking each of you to look back on your time at UCLA Law School. I'm hoping you can share a memory from your period as dean that somehow captures UCLA for you and something that's special about this law school and its community. And let's go from our dean from furthest to go to the present. So Susan, can I begin with you?
I'm going to pass.
Okay, really? Too long ago, the memories cloud?
No, I'm going to see what other people pick up on, because I had so many years there, Jennifer.
All right, so it's hard to pick a specific. Fair enough. All right, who wants to begin? I'll cold call, of course, if I need to, but if one of you wants to volunteer, that's good too. All right, Mike.
So I remember one of the memories that stands really clear in my mind is I was at a Dean's Circle dinner. This must have been my second year. And I was I knew nothing about sports, right? Nothing. And indeed, I kept that going up until I got to the University of Oregon, but which all of you know, and Jennifer, you know well. So I was at the Dean's Circle dinner, and I was, for some reason, I wanted to talk about John Wooden, right? You know, of blessed memory. And I somehow got him mixed up with Dwight Gooden. And so I said, John Gooden. And you could hear everybody like gasping. And then naturally, Jim Barral has never let me forget it during all my years since. But one of the things that immediately thereafter, this could have been a huge gaffe in any setting because he's such a you know, an icon, but everybody accepted it. Everybody sort of said, okay, Mike, he doesn't know anything about sports. He doesn't know anything about UCLA history, but it's acceptable. We accept you with all of your warts. And I thought that was a wonderful part of UCLA, that we're all part of a family, and we all are accepting of each other's foibles and care about each other. And so for me, even though some people are still making fun of me for that day, it's just fun and not antagonism.
That's a really nice story. It's also funny because Mike was ranked recently the 5th most important person in Oregon sports. So he's come a long way with his engagement with sports since his deanship here. So, thanks for that.
I would worry about the Pac-12 given that.
Right. Who'd like to go next? John.
So there are many, many things that I remember that were fun and represent the UCLA Law School community, but one in particular was there was a Saturday evening when there was a serious event about the trial of Augusto Pinochet on one part of campus, and I was dressed in a 3-piece suit and all that sort of stuff. And then I went over to the PILF auction, which was being held at what was then Cobell Commons. And it was students having a lot of fun raising money for each other and for summer stipends for public interest students. And there was an auction going on, and one of the auction items was spending some time with me and having a copy of my casebook. No big deal, right? But we then had a faculty member who's now in the Harvard faculty, Jody Freeman, who decided that maybe it would be a good idea if we could increase the amount of money that could be raised for these fellowships. And so without asking me, of course, she said, if you double the amount of money you're offering for this, I'm sure the dean will be happy to take off his suit and shirt. And so I did. And the result was a lot of photographs and a lot of fun from the students. And at the time, one of my daughters was studying in Germany, and one of the students there was a college friend of hers and sent this picture all over the world saying, "Guess what your dad is doing now?" And it was the kind of community and family and faculty and student event that we had many times, but it did remind me a lot about what UCLA is all about.
That's a funny story, John. I have to say, I think I'm glad that this was prior to the social media moment. I think it's probably
Me
good
too.
for us all that this was prior to Twitter.
No doubt.
Rachel, would you be willing to go next?
Yes, I'm happy to go next. My favorite memory, although there are many and it's a tough competition, is when Justice Prager came to visit UCLA School of Law. And I was escorting him to a faculty lunch, which takes place on the upper floor of the library. And as we entered the library, there's a guard named Keith, and he's wonderfully friendly, warm and welcoming to all the students and all our visitors. And he also was auditing classes, and he was reading a book did a double take. He turned around, conversation in French. Phil, what was my reaction? My first was, we're going to be late to lunch. But then I thought to myself, Justice Prager has moved from the register of polite interest to authentic happiness. And he will never forget this moment at UCLA School of Law, because what you discovered from that moment is that everyone at UCLA Law turns to this institution because they love learning, and that permeates the entire school. And so there's both a wonderful egalitarianism in that, and many of our staff are actually getting degrees at UCLA. As the students are getting their degrees and the faculty are doing their research and alumni are coming back for events that educate them about the world. And at the same time of that there's that equalitarian nature to what's happening, there's also tremendous intellectual ambition and aspiration. And so for me, this epitomizes the culture that is UCLA Law.
That's a fantastic story. And I have to say I adore Keith and have my own Keith stories, but I had never heard that one. And that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Susan, can I circle back to you now?
Yep. I think I have to do a Bill Warren story that goes back to the transition. And he is introducing me to students in a venue outside the law school. I think it was, over in the athletic complex. It must have been an evening event, and maybe it was planned so that there might be alums as well. But I remember it being really students. And he is, ramping up, and he's giving this tantalizing thing about the first woman, the first graduate, all of this. And then he says, but what you don't know is that this is the first dean to have ever had a crush on Elvis Presley. So of course, students are laughing. And I did have to correct Bill that much as I loved Elvis's music, it really was Rick Nelson that I had the crush on.
So you had the details wrong, but a good story nonetheless. That's a wonderful story, and lovely to make us remember Bill as well. So thank you for that. I'd love to turn now. You each accomplished a great deal during your time as deans, and I've learned from each of you and think of every one of you as a mentor and somebody on whose shoulders I stand. I'd love to hear about something you're proud of looking back. I know it's sometimes hard to choose, but I'd love to hear about something that you're proud of, either during your deanship or about the school during the time that you served in this role. Who'd like to start?
I can do this. I've kind of modified your question a tiny bit because I hate talking about what I did, but I do think that I was the first dean who was able to point to the tremendous successes of the faculty's decision made actually the year before I started law school at UCLA to engage in affirmative action, to try to make sure that we would be educating lawyers who would serve all parts of the region. And Murray Schwartz and Bill Warren before me really were in a posture where they were often having to defend the program to graduates of the school. And by the time I become dean, there were beginning to be these extraordinary successes. So I would speak to a reunion class and I would talk about the impact. I would talk about Vicki Simmons Macbeth, made a judge after 5 years in practice, who becomes the first judge in the nation to sentence a slumlord to live in his own building. I would talk about Jim Blancarte, the night of the riots, begging people in his role as a member of the fire commission to let the fire crews do their work because they were attacking the fire crews and preventing them from putting out fires. So this was a very special thing, and it's something that we did a lot of during my time as dean, and I know that my successors have as well.
Thank you for that. I think the dual commitment to access and excellence and inclusive excellence remains, a signal set of values for the institution. Notwithstanding the challenges that legal obstacles like Prop 209 can have produced. I think those values run really deep. So thank you for talking about that incredible moment in time. Who'd like to go next? Okay, how about John then Mike?
Okay. Well, there were many also during the time I was dean, though much shorter, of course, than Susan, period of time. But I think if I were going to single out one, it would be, it kind of goes back to what's special about UCLA as a community too. It's when I was able to work with Chuck Williams in the establishment of the what became the Williams Institute, was the Williams Project at the time on sexual orientation law and policy. And what was particularly noteworthy about that and happy about that was that Chuck sort of came to us through alumni of the school. And then in order to figure out how we could wisely spend a significant gift, I was able to turn to a faculty that had been doing research on sexual orientation law and policies. So I had the likes of Ken Karst and Bill Rubenstein and Jody Freeman and Chris Littleton and a bunch of others to actually help me put together something. And then Chuck and I were able to sit in the dean's office and sort of project out what it might look like over many, many years. And here we are in 2020, and virtually everything that was laid out that afternoon, now 19 years ago or 20 years ago, has come to fruition in a very significant way and has done tremendous good, I think, for the country as a whole and certainly for our law school and the community.
Yeah, that's amazing, right? It's the origin story of the Williams Institute, and now it's got several dozen people and is a leading think tank for issues around LGBT and issues and sexual orientation and gender identity, and has just done so much incredible research and scholarship and shaped that civil rights revolution of our moment. And there it began. You just told us where and how. So thank you for that. Mike, you had your hand up. You're next.
Sure. And let me just say, John, that took a lot of courage because there weren't centers like that devoted to gay rights in those days. And I always thought that was I was always proud of the school and proud of you for what you did. And I really do believe that the Williams Institute was pivotal. I guess we as lawyers say, but for in the progress that was made in the coming years. So that really is a great achievement. Now, I have two achievements I'm going to talk about. One is I hired Professor Jennifer Mnookin during my period as dean, and her husband, Joshua Dienstag, also on faculty of the political science department as well as the law school, and that seems to have been a good decision. Jennifer and I always joke about the negotiation that brought her to the university, and she's a toughie. but we got her, and she's now the best dean in all America. So that turned out well. The other thing that, and it's a little similar to John's, although less courageous, and that was, beginning with Dan Carlson, the Emmett Institute. Again, first in class research entity on a subject that is perhaps the most important subject of our lifetimes. What do we do about climate change? And the vision for that wasn't mine, it was Anne's, that wouldn't it be great if we could look at California, apply the lessons of California to the nation. And we started small, got a great gift from Dan Emmett, support from Ralph and Shirley, and Tony Pritzker and other folks. And now it's just turned into this dynamo. And I'm incredibly proud of it. I read about it in the front pages of the New York Times, just like the Williams Institute. And I think that, you want to leave something behind that makes the school better. And that's one of the things that hopefully not the only thing, but one of the things that I can point to.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for making me blush too. So that was embarrassing, but thank you. But I love these stories of sort of seeds. It is really part of what you do as dean, is you plant these seeds and you get to see the beginnings of those first leaves and maybe even the first blossoms, but then you hope for what will keep going. And so that's a great story. And the Emmett Institute is tremendous. And you should be proud of that. Rachel, how about you?
Well, I want to say, first of all, that no dean has individual accomplishments. Instead, I think you have collective achievements. And those are not possible without tremendous generosity of the community. And so I just wanted to give a couple of examples of the generosity that enabled me to flourish and for the institution to flourish. And so the first was during my first year. I remember writing somewhere in my blue and blue twin set and being asked if I'd ever known any rich people. And I had to say, well, I don't think so. And you could feel the silence, right? Like the only giveaway was a little twitch in the cheek, which I thought was not a good sign. But during that first year, a very sophisticated businessman and philanthropist, Lowell Milken, helped me to put together what was at that time the single largest gift in the law school's history. But it wasn't just about the money, because his generosity was also expressed in what I thought was a very nuanced and subtle tutelage about how people think about investing in an institution. And I did not come from a business background. I did not come from wealth or philanthropy, but I could learn so much through that gift, and it served me well throughout my time. The other thing that I realized was that UCLA School of Law had a very different alumni base. We had a lot of people who didn't know any rich people either when they came to law school. Instead, they were self-made. They transformed themselves and their fields, the city of Los Angeles and beyond. And so I actually could connect with them. I didn't have to come from a privileged background to meet the alumni and understand their concerns. The second example is related to the Williams Institute, where I got to be a witness to history being made, and I was welcomed into that community, and I got a sense of how it was nurtured, their sense of solidarity and shared purpose. It was just tremendous to see the way that they worked together to make change. And finally, the scholarship match. I wanted to raise lots of money for scholarships so that UCLA Law would remain accessible to people from all walks of life. And I was so pleased when our alumni stepped up and gave to these scholarships, but they gave more than money again, because they created a circle of concern. They mentored these students. They remembered who they had once been and imagined who these students could become. And so it is this fundamental generosity of spirit that makes UCLA Law special and made my deanship memorable.
Thank you. That's beautiful. You've really captured both the ethos of UCLA and also the circle of the community that continues, and that I hope some of you on this call feel deeply. Certainly, especially in times like these, our community needs you. Please step up and mentor our students and help them understand what's possible, and be patient with them when they ask something of you or are looking for advice or help. And I think everybody on this call is here because they care. And you've just really captured that beautifully, Rachel.
Jennifer, this conversation reminds me that in my years at Dartmouth were times when I could reflect on something that I think I took for granted before going there. And that is that at UCLA, there was always a comfort with innovation and experimentation. And that I began to just think, well, that's common to all institutions of higher education, but it's really not so much the case that when John was thinking about the Williams Institute, he wasn't thinking about, you know, will this work? Might this fail? Might people be upset? It was this sort of spirit of let's do this, let's try this. And I think I've seen that again and again, and it's a tremendous strength. Some of it may be where we are in Los Angeles, because Los Angeles is that kind of place. But it's definitely the case. And I remember the day that Mitch Bernard at the NRDC, the National Resources Defense Council, came and met with some of us and had this idea for what became, then it was called the Santa Monica Baykeeper Project. And for me, it was just such an easy yes. But some people worried, well, what will happen if this doesn't work? And we just thought, well, let's try this. Let's do this. And that is a part of the ethos of the law school.
And Susan, let's not forget your own leadership in clinical education. I think that was a tremendous contribution during your deanship and was also highly innovative.
Well, I think though, in fairness, Rachel, you know, that was really Murray, because it was under Murray Schwartz that that David Binder was hired, and that was so critical. It's certainly true that I grew it, I supported it, but the innovation there, I think, was really linked a lot to that initial choice, and how much deep thinking David did about what the classroom components ought to look like, what the structure of the student experiences in the courtroom should look like. So that was just like, that's a gift to me. You have this great thing, and then you just, you know, you just highlight it and support it. And but thank you. We did grow the programs.
Well, and that's another example, though, too, about how it takes a village, right? I mean, Rachel's point earlier that no dean does anything alone, and we build on what we inherited and hope to strengthen it. And I appreciate, Susan, that Murray played a role in this, and that, of course, David Binder and many other clinical faculty did too. But I'm going to say you nurtured it, and that's incredibly important to the creation of the clinical model here at UCLA. So we're going to give you some credit too, like it or not. I'm going to intersperse some questions from the audience. We're going to go back and forth a little bit. And I have a pair of questions that are directed at Mike. And the first one, Mike, is just how many alums did you have lunch with during your deanship?
You know, I didn't count, but if you go by pounds gained, which is probably a good indicator, quite a number of alumni.
Fair enough. I think that came from I think that came from Brad Baker, I'm guessing, from the and I think you set a high bar there for those who followed you. I also have another question for you, Mike, which is about college sports. You didn't know much when you were here. We heard about that. And now you're heading the Pac-12 CEO Council. And so that's a pretty substantial journey. Could you tell us a little bit about the deliberations that went into the decision on starting up football and basketball in November?
Sure. And let me first mention, just show how little I knew. I remember going to Bruins basketball games with David Epstein, who, as we know, eventually gave a $5 million gift to name the public interest program. And I invited him to games, and we used to go maybe every couple weeks to a game. and he would basically ignore me during the game and talk to my doctor, Ben Ansell, because he looked at me and said, "You have no idea what's going on." And I thought oh my God, I've just blown this gift. And then ultimately it all worked out, and I knew nothing about basketball, and then came to the University of Oregon, where the president does learn about these things and does attend games, and I actually love them. I didn't love some of the discussions about basketball, football, and the like. None of us did. We decided in the Pac-12, and it was unanimous, that we would postpone football and the fall sports. And the reason that we made that decision, this was unanimous, all 12 presidents and chancellors, was we didn't feel that we could guarantee is too strong a word. We didn't feel we could adequately protect health and safety of the players. We didn't have testing, and California, as well as Oregon, were two states that wouldn't have allowed practice or play at the time. So we decided to postpone, and we were unanimous. And then ultimately, about 5 weeks later, we were able, through the efforts of Larry Scott, who was the commissioner, to get daily testing for COVID. So we realized we would be able to essentially pull a player once they tested positive, so they wouldn't infect the whole group. And in addition to that, the Big Ten had decided to go forward, which led to some pressure and decisions by the governor of California and the governor of Oregon to allow us to play. And so and then the last thing is, a number of us took a week and talked to our players, and we heard all about how much our players were, this was their life, they'd been practicing, they'd been really desperate to be doing this. And, that's a mindset that, I didn't do any sports when I know to look at me, you think I'm athletic, but basically, this is what they did, and this is what they wanted. And I didn't feel it was appropriate to deny them if we no longer had the reasons. And so we're going to go forward, and hopefully we'll be able to make a go of it. But if we're not able to, we're going to cut it off. And everyone was unanimous with that. I won't say comfortable, but unanimous, because no one's comfortable in this day and age with anything.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing a little bit of the background and how you thought about it. Rachel, I'd love to direct a question at you, which is, you've been on the faculty of 3 different UC law schools. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about whether you see any unifying characteristics across the schools, whether there really is something distinctive about the University of California system and public legal education, or any thoughts you might have about that.
Well, it's a great question. And I think that some people think of one university for University of California as a mere slogan, but I really don't think so, because across the 3 law schools where I've been, I have seen some deep, deep commonalities. First of all, these are engines of opportunity. And you continue to see people coming who come from very modest backgrounds. And public education, higher education, has been their route to a better life than their parents had. And I think that's still very true. I also see at each of these institutions a very deep commitment to the communities in which they reside and beyond. And we heard some of these big gifts where the idea is we're not just going to learn the law, we're going to figure out how to change the world. And I think that spirit of obligation and service is very real. And that in turn inspires our students to think of themselves as agents of change, not just as people who are going to represent clients, but authentic agents of change. And if we do our job right, and I think all 3 institutions have been deeply committed to doing that, we give people knowledge and skills, but we also give them a kind of sense of themselves. And they participate in this culture that I mentioned of generosity and ambition. And I think it gives them a really wonderful platform to move forward. So I do see some deep commonalities, including, of course, that commitment to excellence in all that we do, but also of generosity in the way that we conduct ourselves.
Thank you. That's wonderful to kind of get that perspective on the system and the system's law schools, and to recognize that there is a there there to the University of California, which I thoroughly agree with. Susan, I have a question for you, which is, you really were a trailblazer. That's you were the first female dean of UCLA Law School, and you were also the dean who served longest of any of us. And so I think it's fair to say you were a pioneer. Can you comment on your experience? Were there particular challenges? I mean, I'm the third female dean at UCLA. There are some schools out there that still have, some top schools that have yet to have had a single female dean. And Susan, you were the first. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So there were two of us the year I was named, and the year before there were two, but Soya Menchikov was retiring at Miami. So it was a tiny number. There had been some others before. And of course, UCLA graduate Dorothy Nelson was the first female dean of an ABA school other than the first iteration of American University, which was a school only for women originally, and it had women deans. But Dorothy was really the first of a coeducational school, and she had a long and successful deanship. So the irreverent side of me has to make sure that there's time to tell a couple of funny stories about being the first woman.
Please.
And one of them occurred, I think, probably sometime in the first part of the 90s. And in those days, instead of the gathering of alumni that we have like tonight, we had individual class reunions. And so there were many Saturday nights a year when there would be a class reunion only for the class. And the reason I know this is later in the deanship is that early in the deanship, I went to all of those by myself. But as our children got older, Jim started coming with me some. And this story involves Jim. So we are sitting in a room at an off-campus venue in round tables, and it's a class in the 50s. I wish I could remember which year in the 50s. It wasn't one of the very first. And there is a man across the table from us. And for those of you who don't know this, Jim Prager has, even as a young person, did not have hair on the top of his head. So he looked somewhat older. And this man kept trying to engage him across the round table in conversation because he thought this was a classmate, and he thought he knew all of his classmates because these were smaller classes. And finally, his wife, who is trying to explain to him, she finally says to him, "John, he is not your classmate, she is the dean. And it is possible for a woman to be the dean of a law school in 1990, whatever it was." So this was one of those wonderful moments where this woman was having a fine time making this point. And it was quite memorable. But the other thing that I remember is, you think about there will be these problems, but for every person who might have been uncomfortable with the idea, there were so many more who were supportive. And for UCLA alums, I was named the dean, and that meant that I was okay, I think. And I remember Ralph Shapiro saying to me at the very beginning, we had to plan our part of UCLA's first campus-wide campaign. And as I recall, the law school goal was either $12 million or $14 million, which seems like nothing to these incredibly successful people who are on this program tonight. But for where we were, this was a really big goal. And Ralph said to me, I don't know if we can do this, but I don't think we can do this, but you've been told you have to do this, Susan, and we're going to help you. And of course, that's what happened, and we went over the goal. and it was significant. The other thing that I didn't realize at all is that, and I had attended UCLA Law School, so I should have been smart enough to figure this out. I was 39 when I became dean. I was older than the law school was at that point. And I got more than halfway through the deanship before I had that insight. You know, we talked about how we were a young law school, but I'd never sort of put it in that frame myself. The other thing that would happen is I started telling people that Dick Maxwell was 39 when he became dean, because that, and they said, oh no, that can't be right, because Dick didn't have hair on the top of his head either. But that was a way of my saying it's okay, because I think my age was also something that was different for people. So anyway, it was, there probably were bad things that were happening, but I wasn't aware of them. The more dramatic period was, I had our second child in year 3 of the deanship.
Wow.
And during that pregnancy, I was told by law school staff that people elsewhere on the campus were saying, well, what is going to happen? And they would say, well, what do you mean what's going to happen? She's going to have the baby and she's going to be dean. But it was just, and I have to confess that I took a lot of pleasure in being able to break the stereotypes.
Yeah, well,
really did.
well, thank you for being a pioneer in this regard. I mean, now there's a great many more female deans, and you know, Rachel, you were also a pioneer in one of the earliest leading deans of color at a top institution, and thank you for being a pioneer in that way. Do you want to speak about that? Do you have any stories to share in that regard?
Well, you know, I think that it was different because I was the first Latino dean at a top 20 law school. Now there's another couple of them, so that's great. But I think that what's really important is that you have to be everybody's dean, and you have to account for the fact that you have these differences from the traditional image of a dean, and make sure that they don't get in the way of being everybody's dean. And I saw in the Q&A a question about UCLA Law Women Lead, which I created while I was dean. And I think, you know, we've had a couple of recent studies come out, one from the University of Texas's Center on Women in the Law, and the other from the Law School Survey of Student Engagement, showing how students of color still feel marginalized at American law schools, but the problem is the most severe for women of color. And so I think that one of the great things about UCLA Law Women Lead was that it was completely diverse, very collegial, and it embraces everyone, and it creates this bridge for all women to become leaders, to become pioneers in their own right, but also it makes certain that all women, including women of color, are included. And I think that all the data out there show us that that's incredibly important. And it's not enough to just be the person at the top. You have to continue to create the scaffolding that makes it possible for others to cross the bridge and get there with you.
Thank you, that's great. For those who don't know, UCLA Law Women Lead is one of an amazing initiative that was started under Rachel's deanship, which is our female alumni engagement space, and it's really blossomed. And thank you for your vision in imagining that. To just go back to the sort of female dean, I mean, again, I'm the third female dean of UCLA, and in most circumstances, I found it to be really a non-issue, and I feel very grateful for that. Though I will say I've had the experience that almost every other female dean I know has had at some point, and maybe some male deans too, but I think less often, which is there are occasionally moments where you're talking to somebody and you introduce yourself and you say you're the dean, and they look at you a little funny and they say something like, "You're the dean? As opposed to, you know, assistant dean of something. And there are still those moments where where I think it's not taken for granted that people who look a certain way warrant being in roles like this. So it's exciting to see that changing And both Susan and Rachel, you are incredible role models and pioneers in this way. John, I want to turn to you with a question. And you know, we're going through this extraordinarily difficult moment, a global pandemic and so much else. You were dean during 9/11, and obviously that was different in all kinds of ways, but it was also a kind of extraordinary moment for our nation, which had both immediate effects and longer term effects. Did that impact your time as dean? Did it impact our culture at the law school? Is there any wisdom you gained from that period that might be applicable or really very different from this moment that you'd like to share?
I don't know if there's any wisdom about it, but I was struck very much at 9/11 with how impressive our students were. And I think that's true, that's been true through many different periods of time when our students have been part of the society where something significant like this has happened. And I say that in part because I thought of the students as somehow almost automatically more mature after 9/11. Their sort of sense of constructive purpose, which had always been there, seemed, if anything, strengthened. Their resilience seemed strengthened. They came together, I thought, in some ways, more than at other times. And I was just very, very impressed. And I wouldn't be surprised if during and after this pandemic, the same thing may happen. I think there's I don't know whether it's misery loves company or like people growing up with the depression, you know, nobody's better than anybody else. So you all have to do your share and understand that other people are having difficulties too. But there was a sort of important sense of, it's hard for me to describe it other than maturity and decency. And it was very encouraging. And I'm naturally an optimist anyway, but I have a tendency to believe that that will occur this time too.
Thank you. I admire the Bruin optimism, and we all need a little bit of that right now. I want to ask another question that comes from one of our attendees, which is really about the effects of the pandemic on legal education and maybe education more broadly. If we go out, the questioner asks about 50 years in the future, but that's awfully far. Let's sort of say 15. Do you think, will there still be law libraries the way we have them right now, rather than mostly computerized databases? Will there still be law classes rather than pre-recorded asynchronous lectures? Will there be more Zoom? How will things look different? And might what's going on right now in this pandemic speed up forms of educational change for better or for worse? I'd love to hear any thoughts that any of you might want to offer about that.
Well, after I stepped down as dean, I actually tried to think hard about the legal profession and legal education, and wrote a piece about it called The 3 Ages of Modern American Law, or Lawyering. And Jim Burrell was at the session where I presented the working version, and he asked me the question that really helped me think through the last section, which is, are we entering a 4th age of modern American lawyering? And just in a nutshell, you know, there's really like a double helix in defining the profession, and that is expert professionalism, these skills that we use to serve clients, and then social trustee professionalism, which is our obligation to serve the greater good. Both of these historically have been foundations for the privileges of this profession. Historically, what was most contested was social trustee professionalism. What did that mean? Should we be trying to serve the greater good or just take care of our clients? I think what's interesting going forward is that all these technological changes, which this member of the audience has so astutely described, suggest that for the first time in the history of the profession, at least the modern history, the idea of expert professionalism is being contested. And what it means to have knowledge and skills that are more than what artificial intelligence can do. What makes us uniquely capable as lawyers beyond what technology may be able to provide, I think are questions that are going to go to the fundament of this profession, but not this profession alone. I think medicine is going to face very similar challenges as well. But we are especially challenged because we traffic in knowledge, and we don't have something like, you know, we're taking your appendix out. We're just dealing with knowledge and ideas, and that is where technology, this kind of cognitive processes, are trying to be kind of inscribed in ways that won't require us anymore. And I think that that is a fascinating question going forward. The other area that I would just like to touch on briefly is the growing divide, the concentration in the profession in the law firms at the top, which mirrors the concentration in the economy between the top and the bottom. I think that we're going to see an ever increasing divide between people who serve the social trusteeship role, people who are in small and solo practices, large firms, and then the very largest at the top. And this may in turn alter the way that firms traditionally have been financed, because we've often thought of the profession as autonomous because of the way that it's financed. We don't go out and get financiers to come in and provide an infusion of resources. But I think that is going to be under tremendous stress because of the restructuring of the economy and the way the profession mirrors that. So those are a few thoughts.
Thank you. So that's fabulous. You know, Mike, you have a perch as a university president. Do you have thoughts on how this crisis is likely to shape higher ed a little bit more generally from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, there were also a lot of pressures on universities that pre-existed, right? We're going to see a demographic change in the United States with fewer students graduating from high school. So you're going to start to see a shakeout. We also know that there is an increase, particularly this year, in consciousness about civil rights and about the inequities in our society. I'm hoping that one of the impacts of this is going to be less of a pursuit of rankings, less of a pursuit of things that we all know tend to be not the most socially productive ways of competition among universities. I mean, one of my colleagues says we shouldn't be trying to compete with each other for how many people we can exclude. We should be trying to compete with each other for how many people we can include in higher education. The other thing I think that a lot of people are jumping to is, you know, with regard to Zoom and with regard to the fact that we have so much remote higher education, I think that there's a lot of people are thinking that there will be a lot more online education. I think the question sort of indicated that. And, you know, both in terms of colleges in general, universities as in addition to law schools. And, you know, I think we're going to see more of that, but I hope, and I don't expect that we're going to see it take over. I mean, I think that one of the things we learned in our experience last spring, and I think we're going to learn it again this year, is one, students want in-person education. Two, it is one of the unique aspects of in-person education that we learn from each other. And if this country is ever going to have a hope for racial healing and for the ability to understand each other, it's going to come from sitting in classrooms and going out to lunch with each other in a residential environment. And what we could end up seeing is a split, that some universities go, you know, retain the residential model, retain the high impact learning that we have, and some go much more remote. Last thing is, you know, the move towards remote, I think we all understand, ended up creating more disparities because it's relatively clear people who from less privileged backgrounds did less well and in a remote setting. So we will lose a lot if that happens. And you know, my hope is that, and I hope I'm not just being sort of reactionary, my hope is that we don't, that we come up with other solutions to the cost problem of higher education, to the pandemic possibilities, meaning that we are in a risky situation going forward by bringing people together in this way. and that makes it all work and retain what's best of current higher education.
Thank you. John or Susan, do you have anything you want to add on this topic?
Well, I just want to emphasize that, you know, our profession needs people who know how to interact with other human beings, whether that interaction is like this or whether it's in the same room together. And that one of the great lessons of modern clinical education was that those encounters are so important because they cannot be scripted. Unpredictable things happen. People who are trained to be lawyers have to understand that it's not always the legal answer that is going to shape the way the dispute plays out. It's going to be emotion is going to be involved, other things involved. So it's going to be very important, regardless of what the dominant form of the delivery becomes, that we're able to continue to concentrate more on what lawyers are actually doing. And of course, we know that depending on what kind of practice they're in, you know, a piece of litigation for a large corporation is going to be very different than a smaller thing that involves, you know, people who are in small businesses or things like that. But we've got to make sure that we're not going backwards in legal education. And the great thing about a platform like Zoom is it does permit the interaction. And so people can conduct a class much like they would in the classroom if the class isn't too big. And one of the things that we have seen, and I suspect you all have seen it too, because in the spring we had this situation where everyone had taught a group of students, and then in 5 days' time, they were teaching them with this vehicle. And what a lot of faculty found is that some students who had never spoken in their class or who had never volunteered in their class were volunteering at higher rates because they were more comfortable with this than they were with the dynamic that they felt when everyone was looking at them in the classroom. Some of our writing instructors said the small group things they do when they divide people up in their classroom were much more successful in the Zoom chat rooms. So there's going to be a lot that we learn from this about how we can do interactive teaching better. And I think that's going to be fruitful no matter what. But I'm really in the camp of feeling, as Mike does, that if we end up with this all becoming remote, we will lose some really important things that will make it harder for us to solve social problems of all kinds.
I share that, although I also do think that this has invited a look at pedagogy and some innovation and some forms of engagement that we can take back to a world where we don't have to do it this way, but we can, you know, learn from this moment. We are just about out of time, but I want to, John, I want to give you, this is an unfair question because we could spend an hour on it, but I want to give you a chance. You're a distinguished constitutional law expert, and we're in just a completely insane moment. And I wonder if you want to share with those gathered any thoughts about this moment in which we find ourselves, ranging from, you know, something about Supreme Court expansion to whether we're in a constitutional crisis to the events of the last couple of days. And if you want to tell me that that's just too big to take on in 90 seconds, I would understand that too. But
well, I'll take it on in a very,
right.
I'll take it on in a very sort of simplified, sloganeering way. I do think that we are in a moment of constitutional, I don't know if we can call it crisis. I think we'll survive it, although it sort of depends on what happens pretty soon. But I do think, I would say we need to both recapture and reform. So the recapture, I would say, is we need to recapture the good aspirational, a lot of it's still aspirational, but the good aspirational core values of a constitutional system that points towards equality and equal respect for everybody, an inclusionary society in which everybody counts and everybody counts equally. I think that's in there and we can still work with that. But I also think there are reforms that are necessary. Some of the reckoning that we have been talking about in the last few months, the racial reckoning, I will say that when I was a youngster and went to law school, many of my classmates and I went to law school when the civil rights era was beginning, and we thought that law could be a really constructive force, and it was, for improving things. I did think that we would struggle civil rights wise for 2 generations, but by the time we reached 2020 or something, we would have worked really hard. It would have been very difficult, but we would be in a place where we'd all be happy. Well, I think we have improved considerably, but we still have a long way to go. And so I think the Constitution can be used and perhaps reformed in some ways to promote that racial reckoning in particular, which is absolutely essential in this society. I don't think we'll ever get to where we need to be unless we do it. And then I'll add one more thing, which is the Constitution itself, as we know, is deliberately anti-majoritarian in many ways. And that may be acceptable to a certain degree, but there is a point beyond which it will strain and potentially break the bonds of a common community. And I would not like to see that happen. And I think we have to pay considerable explicit attention to trying to make sure it doesn't get out of hand. You know, we may never be able to get rid of, 2 senators from every state, no matter what size. But, maybe California should have 4 and Wyoming has 2, or something like that. I think at some point, the people of this country are going to get to the point of saying, either we're going to break or we've got to make some changes. And I'm hoping for reform rather than breaking. So that's what I would say at this point.
Well, I believe that UCLA law graduates can be lawyers and leaders and part of solutions. And
For sure.
I certainly hope so. I thank you all for participating tonight. I'm really grateful to have this chance to have this conversation. Even more than that, I'm grateful for the extraordinary leadership that each of you brought to our school and institution. Thank you to our audience as well. Thanks for caring about the law school. Thanks for being here. I know that I don't want to keep you any longer because I don't want to keep you from your specific class, sections and sessions and a chance to engage with each other. But I'm really delighted that you've joined us this evening, and I also hugely appreciate you continuing to make the law school matter and your generosity in all ways to this institution. That builds our future, and I'm just enormously grateful. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your weekend, even amidst the myriad challenges of this moment. And go Bruins.
Thank you, Jennifer.